When I was young, I began diving into the mysteries of true crime. But the deeper I go into researching Indiana, the more I realize just how much history is still buried beneath the surface. I'm Erica, and this is Indiana True Crime. Join me as we explore some of these cases: the solved, the cold, the forgotten, the heartbreaking, and discover what makes this beautiful state so eerie and a little scary. If you listen to a lot of true crime, you already know there's an invisible script most stories follow. We're used to hearing about the perfect victim, the straight-A college student, the pregnant wife, the missing children. Those are the stories that make national news, get the massive search parties, and fill our feeds. And they should, because they deserve justice. But the reality of who vanishes or gets hurt in this country is a lot messier and a lot darker than what fits into a neat, comfortable headline. There's a term in criminology that should make everyone who hears it deeply uncomfortable. It's called the less dead. Coined by researchers decades ago, it describes a class of victims who are essentially murdered or kidnapped twice. First by their attacker, and second by a system and a society that looks at their lifestyle, their race, their income, or their struggles, and decide their absence isn't worth a headline. They are the people who, in the eyes of public opinion, count less than others. They are the unhoused, the addicted, the sex workers, the marginalized, and the poor. When they go missing, there are no national news crews, no corporate press conferences on the lawn at the State House. The internet algorithms don't push their faces to the top of your feed because their stories don't fit that neat marketable template of the innocent victim. Today, we're just going to crumple up that template and throw it in the trash. I'm your host, Erica, and for this episode of Indiana True Crime, we're going across the entire state, from the far northern borders down through Indianapolis and right into our southern river communities. We're focusing on 6 names that never got the headlines they deserved. It's time to look past the official silence, past the frozen case files, and talk about the actual human beings behind the statistics. Because a human life isn't valued by a flawless background, a high-paying job, a clean record, race, gender, etc. We all carry the exact same weight. And it is long past time we start screaming the names of the people this system chose to call less dead. Let's begin in August of 2005. Travel with me up to Lake County, to the city of Hammond. It sits right on the border of Illinois, a landscape carved by steel, freight tracks, and interstate loops. On Saturday, August 13, 2005, 13-year-old Alexandra Anaya, known to everyone who loved her as Alex, was at her home on the north side of Hammond. She was a bright, energetic teenage girl who attended Clark Middle School and played soccer and volleyball. Alex was last seen inside her home by her mother in the early morning hours. By the time the sun came up, she was gone. 3 days later, on August 16th, a group of boaters were moving down the Little Calumet River to the 130th Street Bridge on the far south side of Chicago. They spotted something floating in the murky water. When authorities pulled it to shore, they uncovered a logistical and human nightmare. It was a torso. The head, arms, and legs had been meticulously severed from the body. Around the torso, the killer had wrapped heavy-duty towing chains and secured them with a heavy concrete block. The intention was clear. This child was meant to sink to the bottom of the river and never be recovered. Her head and other appendages were never found. A gold chain holding a round religious medallion that Alex always wore was also never found. Through DNA testing, the horrific truth was confirmed. The remains belonged to 13-year-old Alex Anaya. Now pause and think about the sheer brutality of this crime. A 13-year-old child is abducted from her home, dismembered with surgical, cold-blooded precision, chained to concrete, and dumped in a river. If this had occurred in an affluent, tree-lined suburb, it would have been an automatic national media obsession. We would still be talking about it today, but Alex's case was hit by a double wall of apathy. First, there was the geography. Hammond, Indiana, and the south side of Chicago are separated by an invisible state line, but they're worlds apart. The moment her remains were found across state lines, the investigation fractured. The Hammond Police Department, the Chicago Police Department, the Cook County Sheriff, and eventually the FBI all had to pass paperwork back and forth. Jurisdictional boundaries became a convenient excuse for delays. Files got caught in administrative limbo. Second was the demographic apathy. Alex was a young Latina girl from a working-class neighborhood, and historically, the national media ignores those stories. They didn't dedicate endless hours of airtime to her. They didn't treat the terrifying reality of a child being dismembered with the urgency it demanded. Because she didn't fit their demographic profile, they moved on. The forensic details tell us this wasn't a panicked crime of passion. The use of towing chains and a concrete block proved premeditation and an intense level of calculation. The killer knew the waterways. They knew how to handle heavy equipment. They knew how to make a body disappear. Yet despite a $25,000 reward and federal involvement, the case remains an open wound. Alex's mother has spent over 2 decades fighting through the silence of 2 different states. The system let the initial trail freeze because it couldn't figure out which department should foot the bill for the paperwork, proving that if you disappear across a border, the system might just let you stay lost. Staying in Lake County, we'll head to the industrial shoreline of Gary, Indiana. It's July 25th, 2015. It is a hot, humid summer afternoon. 21-year-old Diamond Bynum and her 2-year-old nephew, King Walker, are at home with Diamond's stepmother. To understand this case, you have to understand Diamond. Diamond lived with a severe, rare genetic disorder called Prader-Willi syndrome. This condition causes significant cognitive delays and physical vulnerabilities. At 21 years old, Diamond had the mental capacity of a 7-year-old child. She required constant supervision and could not manage basic survival skills on her own, and she was also incredibly trusting. While her stepmother took a brief 20-minute nap in the afternoon, Diamond and little King walked out the front door of the house on the 500 block of Matthews Street. When her stepmother woke up, the house was silent. They were gone. The vulnerability in this case was absolute. You have King, a toddler, and Diamond, a young woman with the mind of a young child, out on the streets alone. In more affluent communities, a case like this sets off an immediate, massive, institutional chain reaction. The Amber Alert system is triggered, resources are flooded in, and the public is mobilized instantly. In Gary, that chain reaction never happened. Diamond and King were met with a bureaucracy that took days to realize a clock was ticking. When the family ran to law enforcement, the systemic hurdle slapped them in the face. Because Diamond was technically 21 years old on paper, the state classified her as an adult. The initial police response was agonizingly slow, treating the situation more like an adult who simply chose to go for a walk rather than an endangered child trapped in a vulnerable body. The family's desperate request for an Amber Alert was denied by state officials because it supposedly didn't meet the strict abduction criteria for the toddler, and Diamond was too old. Excuse me, what? An adult on paper does not mean that you can be unsupervised, especially when there's a major disability involved. The national media barely blinked. There were no primetime network anchors flying into Gary. Diamond's father and her stepmother had to practically beg for an ounce of coverage. They had to organize their own search parties out of a local church, marching through abandoned properties, screaming into an empty void for someone to help them look for their children. Years have rolled by. King Walker should be in middle school right now. Diamond should be safe at home with her family. Instead, their family is still left staring at the same vacant lots. You do not have a toddler and a severely disabled young woman vanish off the face of the earth into thin air without human intervention. Someone knows exactly which corner they walked past. But because they didn't fit that pristine template of who the evening news deems important, the trail was allowed to go stone cold before it even had a chance to get warm. We follow I-65 south, right into the heart of the state, into Marion County and the city of Indianapolis, a major metropolitan hub, a city that prides itself on hospitality and sports culture, but where so many dark things happen. Beneath that exterior lies a city where your career choice can be turned into a weapon. Let's look at Angie Barlow. In 2016, Angie was 23 years old. Her mother described her as an absolute force, fierce, loyal, and someone who refused to let anyone push her into a corner. Angie also worked as an exotic dancer. On the night of October 26, 2016, Angie received a call for a private party gig at a home on the northeast side of Indianapolis. She was told she would be paid $500 just to dance. Because Angie was intelligent and understood the very real inherent dangers of her industry, she did what so many women have to do. She built her own safety net. Before she walked through the front door of that house, she sent a text message to her best friend. It contained the exact address of the property, followed by a line that should haunt every single one of us. Doing a private party at this address just in case I go missing, LOL. She added the LOL at the end. She put a joke there to soften the jagged edge of her own fear. But she never came back from that party. The moment Angie vanished, her family ran straight to the public and the media, desperate for help. But the response they met wasn't just silence. It was judgment. Because Angie worked as a dancer, the conversation in the local comment sections quickly shifted away from the people who had lured her to the house under false pretenses. Instead, onlookers focused on her job and her lifestyle. It became an excuse for the public to look away, treating her profession as if it somehow erased her right to basic human safety. For 8 agonizing months, her mom waited without any news. Then in June of 2017, a concrete tip led investigators to a residential area on the near east side of Indianapolis, miles away from where the party took place. There, buried in a shallow makeshift grave, they uncovered Angie's remains. She had been shot to death. Here's the part that will make your blood boil. This is not a whodunit. Investigators had persons of interest from day one. They knew exactly whose house she went to. Just 12 days after she disappeared, police recovered Angie's blue Pontiac G6. It was found abandoned at an apartment complex on the northwest side of Indianapolis. The digital breadcrumbs, the cell phone pings, the physical recovery of her vehicle, everything pointed directly into a very tight, specific circle of individuals. Yet nearly a decade later, no one has ever been charged with the murder of Angie Barlow. Her file sits in a drawer. Why? Because when society decides a victim's career makes them unsavory, the public pressure on law enforcement completely evaporates. And if the public doesn't care, the law doesn't rush. Angie Barlow was a human being who took every precaution she could to protect herself. And the system failed her because it refused to see past her profession. Our next case stays nearby in Indy and is often linked to Angie's case and vice versa. In June of 2015, Larissa Marie Sam was 22 years old. She was a devoted mother to a 4-year-old son, and he was her absolute world. Larissa was an easygoing, happy young woman who had big dreams. She played guitar, she loved to sing, and she was actually scheduled to audition for American Idol just 2 days after she disappeared. To make ends meet and support her son, Larissa worked as a dancer at the Classy Chassis, a strip club that used to sit near the intersection of I-465 and South Harding Street. In the early morning hours of June 21, 2015, Larissa finished her shift around 1:30 a.m. She stopped by her uncle's house on South Mount Street to hang out and unwind. At 2:30 a.m., she posted a casual message on Facebook, looking for a texting buddy. Her uncle fell asleep, and sometime around 4:30 a.m., Larissa walked out of the house, got into her gold 2006 Dodge Stratus, and vanished. Just a few hours later, her car was located miles away in the Mars Hill neighborhood on the southwest side of Indianapolis. Mars Hill is an isolated industrial pocket, historically cut off by freight tracks and heavy manufacturing yards, sitting right against the major highway loops. Her car wasn't just parked on the street. It was backed into the driveway of a completely vacant, abandoned home. Think about that detail. Why back it in? You back a vehicle into a secluded, overgrown driveway to hide the license plate from passing patrol cars. The car had a flat tire. Inside the vehicle sat her purse, her cash, her credit cards, her shoes, and her cell phone. But the cell phone's SIM card had been deliberately removed. Investigators managed to pull surveillance footage from a neighbor across the street. The video shows her gold Dodge being backed into that driveway at 5:01 a.m. But the person who stepped out of the driver's seat was not Larissa. It was an unknown man. The video captures him stepping out, turning, and sprinting away down the dark street. If you search for Larissa online today, one of the primary photos used in her missing person profile shows her wearing a black tank top with the words, "Weed is my spirit animal." She had a massive, colorful tattoo of a cupcake, candies, and musical notes across her upper chest. And in a world built on rigid, judgmental victimology, a detail as tiny as a t-shirt or a history of working in an adult club is all a hypocritical society need to tune out. The FBI eventually joined the search after a tip emerged suggesting Larissa had been kidnapped and trafficked. While that specific tip was later suspected to be an extortion attempt, the reality of her disappearance points directly to the dark, silent world of human trafficking. Indianapolis is one of the largest shipping and transit hubs in the United States, with major interstates intersecting the city in every direction. It is a prime pipeline for predators who target vulnerable young women, isolate them, disable their vehicles, strip their digital footprint by pulling their SIM cards, and move them before anyone even realizes they are missing. Yet over a decade later, Larissa Sam's name is buried. Her son Marcus had to grow up into a young man without his mother, holding on to a handful of old videos just to remember the sound of her voice. Her family is still left asking the same question to an empty room. Why doesn't anyone seem to care? Let's move south down Highway 37 into Monroe County, Bloomington, Indiana. To the outside world, Bloomington is a picturesque, affluent college town, dominated by the sprawling campus of Indiana University. It's a place of limestone architecture, manicured lawns, and progressive ideals. But Bloomington, like many college towns, has a stark and visible divide between the transient wealth of the university and the generational poverty of the local community. In September of 2010, 29-year-old Crystal Grubb lived on the other side of that divide. Crystal was a mother of 2 young daughters. She was poor, she didn't have a reliable vehicle, and she navigated social circles that were intimately tied to the local low-level drug trade. On September 18, 2010, Crystal was walking with her boyfriend and 2 other men near a scrapyard. It was a desolate stretch of dirt paths and industrial debris. Sometime during that walk, Crystal vanished. For 13 agonizing days, Crystal's mother, Janice, did everything a mother is supposed to do. She walked the police station halls, she knocked on doors in the neighborhoods where her daughter frequented, and she begged local news outlets to run a picture of Crystal. The response she got was deafening silence. Because Crystal was associated with people who used drugs. Because she was poor, her disappearance was treated by the public and early investigators as a lifestyle choice. The underlying narrative was clear. What do you expect when you hang out in those places? On October 1st, 2010, a farmer operating a combine in a cornfield off Sample Road, just near State Road 37, noticed something unusual in the rows. It was Crystal. Her body had been dumped in the dirt, left to decompose under the autumn sun. Her death was quickly ruled a homicide. Here's where the concept of the less dead becomes undeniable. Just 9 months after Crystal's body was found in that cornfield, a 20-year-old white affluent IU student named Lauren Spearer vanished after a night out at the campus bars. The contrast in the societal response is staggering. Within 48 hours of Lauren's disappearance, the city of Bloomington was completely transformed. National news networks set up permanent satellite trucks downtown. Thousands of volunteers formed search grids. The university mobilized its entire infrastructure. Private donations poured in, funding massive billboards and high-priced private investigators. Law enforcement held daily press conferences. Janice Grubb watched all of this from her home, just miles away, holding the autopsy report of her own murdered daughter. She asked a question that should break the heart of anyone listening. Why didn't they search for my daughter like that? Bloomington police detectives would later admit in archival interviews that the stark socio-economic disparity directly dictated the resources and attention the two cases received. Crystal's case had suspects. The men she was walking with that night gave conflicting stories. The location where her body was found was highly specific. Whoever put her there knew that specific farmer's field layout. Yet, no one has ever been charged. Crystal Grubb was written off as collateral damage of a rough lifestyle. While the community proved that some missing daughters are worth national movement, and others aren't even worth a search party. And this is not to say that there shouldn't be people looking for Lauren. And I believe that Crystal's family also believes that people should be looking for Lauren. But this is just to show you the disparity between the two cases. Leaving Bloomington, we travel south on I-69 all the way down to the southwestern tip of Indiana, into Vanderburgh County, into Evansville. This is a place where the system uses words like homeless or addicted as an active eraser, flattening a human being's entire existence into a label that allows a community to forget they ever existed. Let's look at Andy Wagner. In August of 2022, Andy was 24 years old. She was deeply loved by her family. She had a striking face with a distinct mole near her upper lip, and she carried her love for her mother directly on her skin, with her mom's name tattooed on her forearm. But Andy was also locked in a brutal, exhausting struggle with substance use disorder, and she was experiencing severe housing instability. On August 6, 2022, Andy made a brief, unexpected stop at her grandparents' house on Stanford Drive in Evansville. She packed a small bag and walked out the door without telling anyone where she was headed. It was the last time her family ever saw her. When a person with a pristine middle-class background goes missing, the public bulletins scream, "Endangered missing adult." But when the official flyers and early local news snippets went out for Andy, the headlines explicitly labeled her as a missing homeless woman who frequented local motor inns and went by the alias Andy Blair. Do you know what happens to the public psyche when they see the words homeless and addict stamped into a missing persons poster? The empathy dries up instantly. The comment sections fill up with dismissive shrugs. People assume she just chose to drop off the grid, that she was on a bender, or that she didn't want to be found by her family. They write her off as a transient statistic, but while the public looked away, the reality behind the scenes was incredibly dark. This was not a young woman who simply walked away from her life. The timeline reveals that after leaving her grandparents' house, Andy was at a residence with an ex-boyfriend. He would later claim she left his home late that night or early the next morning, but forensic digital evidence painted a completely different picture. The cell phone Andy was using continued to ping at that exact location until the afternoon of August 7th. The case was so severe that the public facade of a runaway homeless woman was completely shattered when the FBI and the Indiana State Police stepped in. This wasn't a low-level local search. In May of 2024, federal agents and state detectives executed massive search warrants across 3 separate properties in and near Oakland City, digging for physical evidence linked directly to her disappearance. Law enforcement recovered items that were sent straight to the state's forensic labs. Predators explicitly target people who are unhoused and struggling with addiction because they don't count on our collective judgment to keep them safe. They know that if they hurt someone society deems unsavory, the public outcry won't be loud, the billboards won't go up, and the searches won't disrupt the city. Andy's mother spent the final year of her life fighting through the systemic apathy, desperately searching for her daughter, until she passed away in December of 2023. Her heart was broken by the silence. Andy Wagner was a daughter and a sister, and her life will not be erased by a label. 6 different cases. 7 lives pulled from the cold case folders across the state of Indiana. Alex Anaya, Crystal Grubb, Angie Barlow, Diamond Bynum and King Walker, Andy Wagner, Larissa Sam. None of them fit the media's perfect marketable mold. They were people of color, they were disabled, they were poor, they were unhoused, they fought addiction, or they worked in industries that a judgmental society looks down upon. But grief doesn't care about a zip code. A mother's tears don't stop based on someone's addiction or mental health. The agony of a child growing up without a parent is exactly the same, whether that parent was a corporate executive or a dancer at a local club. True crime isn't supposed to be cheap entertainment that validates our cultural bias or makes us feel safe in our own moral superiority. It's supposed to be a tool. It's supposed to be a fierce, unyielding spotlight for the people who were left in the dark. The next time you see a missing person poster or short blurbs in the local news, I want you to look past the labels. Look past the street names. Look past the lifestyle. Remember that behind every single folder is a human being who is loved, who is missed, and whose right to justice is absolute. Thank you for listening to this episode of Indiana True Crime. Thank you for standing in the gap. And thank you for helping me say their names. If you've been following my research over on TikTok, thank you for bringing that energy over here. If you're new, hit that follow button. If you have a local Indiana cold case or a piece of history that you think has been buried for far too long, reach out to me at indianatruecrime@gmail.com. So until next time, keep digging, stay safe, and remember what's lurking just beneath the Indiana surface.